From Charles Manson, who manipulated his followers into committing horrific murders, to Ted Kaczynski, the genius who terrorized the nation as the Unabomber. These men weren't just infamous for their crimes. Their power and influence stretched even behind bars. Here are the 10 most feared men in U.S. prisons. 1. Charles Manson. Charles Manson is one of the most infamous criminals in American history. Manson was the mastermind behind the gruesome Tate LaBianca murders that took place in 1969. What makes him particularly terrifying is his ability to manipulate and control others. Manson didn't actually commit the murders himself. Instead, he convinced a group of followers, known as the Manson family, to carry out the killings for him. That's pretty unsettling when you think about it. He had such a powerful influence over these people that they were willing to do whatever he told them, even murder. The murders themselves were brutal. The victims included actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time, and several of her friends. Manson convinced his followers that these murders would spark a race war, which he called Helter Skelter, based on his twisted interpretation of a Beatles song. He truly believed that these horrific acts would bring about societal collapse and that he and his followers would somehow come out on top after the chaos. Once Manson was arrested and convicted, he was sentenced to life in prison. People who interacted with him in prison could still feel that he was dangerous, even though he didn't have physical power over anyone anymore. He died in 2017 at the age of 83. There are documentaries, movies, books, and endless discussions about him as people try to understand how one person could have such a hold on others. 2. Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski, who is better known as the Unabomber, is one of the most infamous criminals in modern U.S. history. Kaczynski's story is so terrifying because of how long he was able to terrorize the country while completely staying off the radar. From 1978 to 1995, Kaczynski sent bombs through the mail, targeting universities, airlines, and other institutions. His bombs killed 3 people and injured 23 others over nearly 2 decades, and it took a long time before anyone even had a clue about who he was or why he was doing it. What makes Kaczynski especially frightening is that he was a brilliant man. He was a former math professor who had attended Harvard at the age of 16, so we're not talking about someone who was just randomly violent. He had a plan and used his intelligence to create sophisticated bombs that were difficult to trace. His campaign was motivated by his belief that modern technology was destroying humanity. Kaczynski wrote a manifesto, which he demanded be published by newspapers, where he laid out his radical anti-technology views. He believed that society needed to be destroyed in order to save people from the dangers of technological advancements. For years, law enforcement couldn't figure out who was behind the attacks. The FBI even created a special task force to track down the Unabomber. But Kaczynski was so careful and calculated that he managed to evade capture for a long time. The fear of the unknown only made him more terrifying. People didn't know when or where he would strike next. It wasn't until his brother recognized the writing style in his manifesto and alerted the FBI that Kaczynski was finally caught. After his capture in 1996, Kaczynski was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In June 2023, Ted Kaczynski was found dead in his prison cell at the age of 81. His death, suspected to be a suicide, occurred at a federal medical center where he had been moved due to health issues.
3. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most infamous criminals in American history. Dahmer's crimes were so horrific that they left a lasting impact on anyone who learned about them. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 young men. What made his crimes even more disturbing was the way he handled the bodies, dismembering them, committing acts of necrophilia, and even engaging in cannibalism. His calm and almost normal exterior hid the monstrous things he was doing, and that's part of what made him so terrifying. Dahmer was extremely calculated in his approach. He would lure his victims, often young men he met in bars, back to his apartment by offering them money or alcohol. Once they were in his home, he would drug them before murdering them. But it didn't stop there. Dahmer kept body parts as souvenirs, and in some cases, ate parts of his victims. He even tried to create zombies out of some of his victims by drilling holes in their heads and pouring acid into their brains, hoping to control them while they were still alive. The most chilling thing about Dahmer was his calm, almost indifferent attitude toward what he had done. When he was finally arrested in 1991, police found disturbing evidence in his apartment, including photographs of dismembered bodies and a fridge with body parts. Dahmer admitted to everything without much hesitation, and his calm demeanor during his confessions shocked many people. It was as if he felt no remorse for the atrocities he had committed. Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison in 1992, but even behind bars, his reputation followed him. Inmates were terrified of him because of the sheer cruelty and coldness of his actions. In 1994, just 2 years into his sentence, Dahmer was killed in prison by a fellow inmate. He was beaten to death with a metal bar in the prison gym. His death was brutal, but many people believed that it was a form of justice for the horrifying crimes he committed. 4. Richard Kuklinski. Richard Kuklinski, better known as the Iceman, is one of the most feared and ruthless contract killers in history. Kuklinski's story is terrifying because he wasn't just a hitman. He was someone who seemed to enjoy the act of killing and did so with a cold, emotionless demeanor that earned him his chilling nickname. He claimed to have murdered over 200 people, many of them in brutal and creative ways, often at the request of mob bosses. Kuklinski worked as a contract killer for the mafia, and he was known for his efficiency. He used a wide variety of methods to kill, ranging from guns and knives to more unusual means, like cyanide and even crossbows. He was called the Iceman because he would sometimes freeze the bodies of his victims to confuse investigators about the time of death, making it harder for the police to track him. What's even more chilling is that Kuklinski led a double life. To his family and neighbors, he seemed like a regular guy, a husband and father who lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. They had no idea that he was spending his time working for the mob, carrying out brutal murders for money. Even when Kuklinski was finally arrested in 1986 and sentenced to life in prison, his reputation didn't fade. In prison, he was still seen as a cold and remorseless killer. Richard Kuklinski died in 2006 at the age of 70 while still serving his prison sentence. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is one of the most powerful and feared drug lords in history. As the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, he controlled a massive drug trafficking operation that moved tons of cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine, and heroin from Mexico into the United States and beyond. What really made El Chapo infamous wasn't just his role in the drug trade, but also his ability to escape from prison, twice, making him seem almost untouchable. El Chapo first escaped from a maximum security prison in Mexico in 2001 by bribing guards and being smuggled out in a laundry cart. After being recaptured in 2014, he escaped again in 2015 through a mile-long tunnel that was dug directly to his cell. The escape involved sophisticated planning, including the use of motorcycles on rails to transport him through the tunnel. Even after he was recaptured in 2016 and extradited to the United States, his reputation as a dangerous and feared figure remained. In 2019, El Chapo was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years on charges that included drug trafficking, murder, and money laundering. He was sent to ADX Florence, a supermax prison in Colorado known as the most secure prison in the U.S., where he's been held in near total isolation. 6. Larry Hoover. Larry Hoover is the leader and founder of the Gangster Disciples, one of the most powerful and notorious street gangs in America. Even though Hoover has been in prison since the 1970s, his influence and control over the gang have never really diminished. What makes Hoover especially feared is his ability to run gang operations from behind bars. Hoover was convicted of murder in 1973 and sentenced to life in prison. However, that didn't stop him from continuing his activities. In fact, while in prison, he expanded the Gangster Disciples into a major criminal organization involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and other illegal activities. The Gangster Disciples have a massive presence in cities across the U.S., and Hoover's word is law for many of its members, both inside and outside of prison. Hoover's control over the Gangster Disciples made him the target of a massive federal investigation in the 1990s. In 1997, he was convicted on additional charges of drug conspiracy and sentenced to 6 life terms in federal prison. 7. Nicky Scarfo. Scarfo is one of the most violent and feared mob bosses in American history. Scarfo ruled the Philadelphia Mafia with a level of brutality that few could match. He was the kind of guy who didn't hesitate to order a hit on someone, even for the smallest offenses. If he felt even slightly threatened or disrespected, he would have someone killed. That's what made him so feared, both by his enemies and even his own men. No one was safe from his violent tendencies. Scarfo's nickname, Little Nicky, came from his small stature. He was only about 5 feet 5 inches tall. But don't let that fool you. His size didn't stop him from being ruthless. Under his leadership in the 1980s, the Philadelphia Mafia became one of the bloodiest crime families in the country. He believed that ruling through fear was the best way to keep control, and he often ordered killings to send a message, even to his own associates. In 1987, Scarfo was arrested and charged with a variety of crimes, including murder and racketeering. His trial revealed just how brutal and paranoid he was. Scarfo's violent legacy remained with him until his death in 2017. He passed away at the age of 87 while serving his sentence in a federal prison. 8. Terry Nichols. Terry Nichols was the co-conspirator in the 1995 bombing, which was carried out by Timothy McVeigh. The bombing targeted the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people, including 19 children, and injuring hundreds more. Nichols played a key role in the bombing by helping McVeigh acquire the materials used to build the bomb, such as ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. While McVeigh was the one who set off the bomb, Nichols helped plan the attack and provided the necessary support to carry it out. For his involvement, Nichols was arrested, tried, and convicted. In 1997, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of now, Terry Nichols is still alive, serving multiple life sentences in a high-security prison. He has largely remained out of the public eye since his conviction, but his involvement in such a catastrophic event has cemented his reputation as one of the most feared and despised men in the U.S. prison system. 9. Edmund Kemper. Edmund Kemper, also known as the Co-Ed Killer, is one of the most chilling and feared serial killers in American history. Kemper murdered 10 people between 1964 and 1973, including his own mother, in brutal and disturbing ways. Standing at 6 feet 9 inches and weighing over 250 pounds, Kemper was an intimidating figure. But it wasn't just his size that made him terrifying. It was his cold, methodical approach to murder. He would pick up young female hitchhikers, murder them, and then perform acts of necrophilia and dismemberment. Kemper's murders were particularly brutal, and he later admitted that killing his mother was his ultimate goal. In one of the most disturbing parts of his story, Kemper decapitated his mother and used her head as a dartboard. He even invited her friend over afterward and killed her too. In 1973, after killing his mother, Kemper surprisingly turned himself into the police, confessing to all his murders. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of now, Ed Kemper is still alive, serving his sentence in California Medical Facility. 10. Whitey Bulger. Whitey Bulger was a notorious Boston mob boss who ruled the streets with ruthless efficiency. He was involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and murder, running a vast criminal empire that kept him feared both by his enemies and his own associates. What made Bulger particularly infamous was his secret double life as an FBI informant. While providing the FBI with information about rival gangs, he continued to engage in his own violent criminal activities. Bulger's violent nature was well known. He was responsible for numerous murders, often killing people he felt had betrayed him or were a threat to his power. He ruled the streets of Boston with an iron fist, and many people lived in constant fear of crossing him. His ability to evade capture for so long, he went on the run for 16 years before finally being caught in 2011. During his time on the run, he was one of the FBI's most wanted criminals. In 2013, Bulger was convicted of 31 counts, including racketeering and involvement in 11 murders, and was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 5 years. But his time in prison didn't last long. In 2018, Bulger was transferred to a federal prison in West Virginia, where he was brutally murdered by fellow inmates within 24 hours of his arrival. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into dark and mysterious topics. Let us know in the comments which story shocked you the most, or if there's someone you think should be on this list.